welcome to So You Want to Be a Data Scientist podcast. If you're an aspiring data scientist yourself, don't forget to check the website. It is soyouwanttobeadatascientist.com. On the website, I share weekly articles and resources talking about what it is like to be a data scientist. I also share my insights about what to learn to become a data scientist efficiently. So don't forget to visit the website and subscribe for my weekly updates. Welcome, everyone. Today I have Samantha Zeitlin with me. She's joining us from San Francisco, and she's going to talk about what being a data scientist is all about. So welcome, Samantha.
Thank you.
So let's start with your company. You are working at Sentry.io, and what does that company do?
So Sentry is an application monitoring tool. We have SDKs for different languages that let you wrap your exception and error handling, as well as monitoring when your application is healthy. So our goal is to help teams build better software faster. And our philosophy is that things break all the time, and we want to help you figure out what's broken faster. So the idea is that we focus on code, and we're there for all developers. So we have open source and free options, as well as hosted software as a service and single tenant options for enterprise.
And you're selling this as a service to other companies, I assume.
Yeah, although the majority of our users are individual developers.
Oh, really? Oh, interesting. And I guess you also get a lot of data from this.
We have quite a lot of data. It's structured event data, which is kind of great for me because I joined in early December as the first data scientist. We had an analyst already, and she immediately got sucked into doing a lot of sort of business intelligence kinds of things. And I was hired to start setting up machine learning.
That sounds great. And before we go more into details of what you do there, I want to ask you a little bit of your personal journey. So, how did you end up where you are right now? Can you tell us a little bit about your background, your previous jobs?
Yeah. So I guess the short version, I'll start and try and give you a really quick summary. I went to a science and tech magnet high school in Virginia, where I grew up. And I ended up doing biotech and went to college at University of Pennsylvania, where I studied biochemistry. And I started working in a lab when I was 16 at Georgetown University. And I was a research scientist for about 20 years. I did my PhD at Scripps Research in San Diego. And then I did a postdoc for 7 years. And I taught for 1 quarter at University of Irvine, University of California. And then I couldn't get a job. I was unemployed for a while. And I was lucky enough to get a job as a staff scientist at UCSF for about 1.5 years. And then some friends in biotech recruited me away. And I worked at this company called Geron for less than a year before they shut down research. And at that point I said, I don't want to be unemployed again. And I'm kind of tired of this job hunting thing. I had tried very hard to get a faculty position, and the economy had crashed. It was 2009 when I finished my postdoc, and it was the worst possible time to be on the job market. And someone I met on Caltrain said, hey, maybe you should think about learning Python. And I had tried to learn how to code prior to that. We were required to take Pascal at my high school, and I absolutely hated it. I had done a little bit of Unix scripting over the years and a little tiny bit of Ruby, but I just it didn't make sense to me. For whatever reason, the way the languages were written just didn't suit the way my brain works, but Python just clicked right away. And I started learning pandas really early. And around that same time, we moved to San Francisco. My partner got a job at a startup. He was a self-taught programmer who also was a scientist who decided he didn't want to stay in research. And I've heard what data science was around that time. And I thought, this is the dumbest name for a job that I've ever heard. It sounds so redundant and strange and repetitive. So I initially was kind of like, well, I guess I'll try to learn some R. I don't know. I didn't know any SQL either. So I had a few really terrible job interview experiences because I was completely unprepared for the types of things they were going to ask me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really grateful to those people that they took the time to put up with me being totally unprepared. And then I was lucky enough, I met someone at a Girl Geek dinner who said, hey, I know about a startup that's hiring. I can introduce you to them. And I was lucky enough that a startup gave me an opportunity because I had done a little bit of contract work at that point for friends of friends where I was doing some machine learning and data visualization kinds of things, but I just had such a hard time getting my first full-time job. And my first job ended up being full stack at this startup.
So you started as a developer.
Well, it was supposed to be data science, but they didn't really have data yet. And I did end up building a model for them based off of data that customers would upload as individual CSVs. Um, but after that, I was unemployed for a little while. I went to Yahoo, which ended up being great, but it was right at the tail end of when Marissa Mayer was leaving, when Verizon took over. So that was a really interesting experience because I joined as part of a startup that Yahoo had acquired called Brightroll, and they did video ad serving. And I never in a million years thought I would want to work on advertising. And it ended up being super fun, actually, because they had their data in really good shape already, and there was a ton of it. And it was my first time getting to do big data analysis. And our team was really well respected. I was lucky enough to join a very established team that had a good reputation, and they were great about onboarding me. And I just felt really welcome on the team, which helped a lot. And then they laid off all the engineers that we were working with, and Verizon brought in the people from AOL because they had acquired both Yahoo and AOL around the same time. So it was really interesting because I got to learn the way the Brightroll people did things, as well as a bit about how Yahoo did things, as well as the major contrast with how AOL did things. Um, so that was a really interesting learning experience. And then I had some friends who recruited me away to a couple of startups. I ended up having two full-time jobs for almost a year. One was video gaming, and the other was a music video mobile app.
Mm-hmm.
And there I set up the team from scratch. So we had no ops support, we had no data engineers. I was employee number 4. So I hired 3 people. We had a really great team, and we had way too much work to do.
I can imagine.
Yeah, we had really a lot of work to do. So that was interesting because it was not the challenges that I expected. Um, and then I had some friends who recruited me away to another startup. Um, and now I'm at Sentry since early December, and it's been a really great fit so far. I'm really excited about the work that I'm doing.
Nice. So it's been a really long journey for you so far.
It's been a while, yeah, and I've learned a lot. I think, I didn't have a lot of mentors when I was in research. I had um, kind of a difficult time with that, and I swore to myself when I switched to software I was going to do a better job of finding people who were going to help grow my career.
Yeah. It definitely really helps to have people on the higher levels who can show you the ropes and also tell you what's important and what's not and what you should focus on. I also
Exactly.
found that that was a really important thing to have. And I also see that you made the jump from academy to academia to business life, and I think that's also something I hear many people are interested in, but they're kind of scared. They don't want to put themselves out there, and they're kind of afraid that it's going to take them too long. But I guess we can tell them your story and how you achieve this.
Well, I mean, I was fortunate that I could afford to be unemployed for a while and teach
Mm-hmm.
myself full on, right? I
Yeah.
didn't go back to school, so I didn't have additional tuition costs or anything like
Mm-hmm,
that. I
mm-hmm.
just had to pay my rent, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
But it also is important to have the courage to kind of put yourself out there and try new things and not be scared. Like, for example, apparently you took this position that was supposedly data science, but also a little bit programming. So, I can easily see someone saying, well, actually, that's not for me. But, the more you try different things, the more you realize what you actually want to do, also.
Exactly. Yeah. It helped me a lot because I really thought, there's a lot that I really enjoy about development and just writing code all day. But I, learned through a few of the roles that I had that I don't want to be just a data engineer full time because I tend to get bored with that. And I miss doing analysis and building models.
Yeah, and the way to understand this is just to do it and then see that you don't like it. I think it's the most efficient way, rather than
Yeah,
keep reading about it.
yeah, definitely. But it gives you a better, at least for me, it's given me much more appreciation for what my coworkers do also.
Yeah, exactly.
And it makes it easier for me to have cross-discipline collaborations, which
Hmm.
I did all through my research career also. Um, and it's just the way I prefer to work. So
Yeah, yeah. But now you're a data scientist, right? And that's your main role.
yeah, so I lead the data team at Sentry. We're currently 3 people.
Okay,
And
nice. Must be exciting to be leading a team.
it is exciting, and we need to hire at least a couple more people. I'm
Hmm.
currently interviewing senior data engineers and hopefully going to hire another data scientist or analyst, maybe both. We'll
Nice.
see.
Okay, so let's talk about how you studied for data science, because you said you weren't actually trained for this. You weren't actually trained for data science. What kind of resources did you use?
Well, so I think one thing I want to emphasize is that I came from a field that I think a lot of people don't realize is quantitative. I was in
Hmm.
cell biology, and when I first started my PhD, it was very common for people to publish papers where they showed a handful of pictures of individual cells and then maybe a bar chart. And they would count like 20 cells by hand and they would say, just take our word for it that the rest of them look like this, right?
Hmm.
But by the time I finished my postdoc, I was publishing papers where we were looking at thousands of cells per well of a multi-well plate, always in triplicate, right? And so we were already doing big data, basically. We were doing what was called salomics. Um, and so when I switched to data science, I realized all of that population statistics and dealing with, you know, bimodal distributions and time series and stuff was going to be really relevant. I just needed to learn how to code because I'd only used proprietary tools really for analysis up to that point.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I did learn Python the hard way. I joined a Women Who Code group that was doing a Coursera class on Python. I did a series of other Coursera things that seemed useful to sort of fill in the gaps. Um, and a few other books. I learned TDD because test-driven development just made sense to me because it's much closer to the way
Hmm.
we do things in lab, right? Where you're designing sort of controls and saying, if it works, it should look like this. If it doesn't work, this is the
Yeah.
negative result we expect. So you have something to compare against, and that helped me bootstrap a lot of my learning because if you're writing tests, you're basically writing twice as much code and you're learning to test your assumptions as you go along. And that really helped me a lot with understanding how architecture should work. Um, and then I learned quite a bit from my coworkers, and had a friend who taught me a lot. It helped that my partner codes a lot, and so I could ask him, especially when I was first starting, because I didn't have a lot of community at first. But I joined the PyLadies Slack group and the Women in Tech Slack group. I'm also in the Women in Machine Learning and Data Science Slack group, which is how I met you. Um, and I, just asked things on Twitter. I had lots of people that I could ask. I was lucky enough that I met some people through Twitter who started a group that I joined, and I was able to ask them a lot of questions. I still ask them things all the time. I'll say, "Hey, is anybody using Google Cloud with
Yeah.
Beam or whatever?" And they'll be able to help me.
Yeah, that's great. So you mainly use online courses and basically a support of the community.
Yeah, primarily. I mean, I did use some books, but I found that, at least for me, learning with videos and interactive tools seemed to be easier. Um,
I see.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that's also what many people prefer when it comes to learning something new rather than reading books.
Mhm.
But why did you choose data science? Was there a specific reason that you chose to be a data professional, or it kind of just happened?
Well, I mean, I always loved data. And by the time my postdoc was ending and I was working at UCSF doing drug development, it was very clear to me that I didn't necessarily want to be the person doing the pipetting anymore. I didn't need to run 1,000 more Western blots in order to be satisfied that I was getting data. I just wanted the data. Um, so I realized, especially after doing a few of these different types of jobs where I was doing contract work in looking at gas and electric data, and then working in solar finance and looking at their data, and then working in advertising and looking at their data, I felt more and more confident along the way that there's plenty of interesting questions everywhere you look, and I didn't need to stay in biology in order to find interesting things to do.
No, I definitely agree with that. I think especially in industries, let's say, who are a little bit more older, I think they're a bit slower to adapt new technologies like data science.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to see even more interesting applications in the coming future, because I see sometimes online people say that, data science is ending, it's a dying profession. I definitely don't agree with that. I think there's still a ton of work we can do and ton of the potential that we're not fulfilling yet. So it's good to hear it from others too.
Yep, I agree.
So let's talk about your daily work a little bit. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do on a typical day? What kind of tasks do you do?
Well, right now I'm working on an anomaly detection model,
Hmm.
as well as some root cause analysis, because we know that our users are saying, hey, I can't fix all the errors in my code all the time, so I want to ignore some of them. But I want you to tell me which ones are the important ones. So we're going to use machine learning to help them with that. So I have that project going. And then I've got a data engineer on my team who's working a lot on building better pipelines coming from our production data into our analysis data warehouse. And I've got this junior data scientist on the team who's been doing a variety of different types of analysis, looking at data related directly to the product as well as user behavior. So I spend a lot of time in meetings with other teams trying to understand what types of questions they're trying to ask. And then my team and I figure out what data do we need to help answer those questions. And then usually we'll do some analysis of some kind and maybe build some models and then figure out, is there a dashboard that we need to build or something that either helps display the output of the model or allows these teams to help answer their own sort of day-to-day business questions.
So, yeah, because probably it comes from you being a senior data scientist, also that you need to communicate with people a lot too and be in a lot of meetings, I'm guessing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, since I'm sort of the technical lead as well as the manager right now. Um, but yeah, so the models that I'm working on right now, we're doing prototypes, and the goal is to have those integrated into the product. But
Mhm.
it's still very early days in terms of just proof of concept.
I see. But do you still do some hands on work as part of your job?
I do, yeah, yeah, and it's one of my main challenges is carving out blocks of time where I can actually code.
Hmm.
And I don't get to code every day, but I do have at least a few days a week where I get to code in, a couple hour blocks here and there,
I see.
which I can get a lot done in that amount of time.
Hmm.
So,
Okay. Yeah, that's good enough. But are you the one who is distributing the tasks to the rest of the team right now?
well, I'm trying to empower them to own their own projects. So I'm helping them scope out so that we don't overpromise other teams, you know, on timelines. And we're trying to make sure that we're answering the right questions, because I think sometimes people will come to you and they'll say, hey, I want this thing. And when you dig further, it turns out that what they actually want is something slightly different.
Yeah.
And um, So, helping them understand sort of what's actually going to be the most useful and what they need in the short term versus the long term is not always the same. So that's, yeah, a lot of sort of product understanding. And I'm still getting up to speed on the history of how Sentry works. And it's also very important for me to coordinate with other teams on new features that they're currently working on. So we understand if things are going to change in the near future.
Yeah, I also feel like, based on the thing that you just said, sometimes when you have clients come to you, or other teams asking you to do something, you really have to act as kind of like a consultant, apart from
Hmm.
being the technical person, and
Yeah.
tell them what the capabilities and limitations of what you're doing is, so that they can understand what they really need rather than what they think they need. So that's kind of part of the job, I feel like.
Well, and often people, I think, smart people will come to you and say, well, I'm not really sure what I need, but these are the things I'm thinking about.
Hmm.
And then they're happy to work with you to help refine what is the right question to be asking. So I'm really grateful that I feel like the people at Sentry are really thoughtful and open minded. And it's a great combination because they don't take themselves too seriously and everybody's very collaborative.
Hmm. Oh, that's great. It's really great. But you said then there are people who come to you and talk to you about projects. I'm wondering about the general structure of how everything works. How do you guys come up with projects? Is it always some other team coming to you and asking about a new feature, or do you guys also come up with your own projects inside the team?
Both. Yeah, we definitely do both. I mean, I've always found that the more you look at data, you're answering a question with another question, right? It's rare that you can say like, okay, we're done. We've answered all the questions. Um, so I think that it always comes back to the same basic things about what are our customers actually doing? What problems do we need to solve for them? And, you know, how do we find out what their pain points really are? Because sometimes customers will come and sort of wave their hands and say, I don't know, but I feel like that there's too much noise or whatever. And then you have to translate that into, oh, okay, you're getting too many emails. Right?
Okay. So, talking about a little bit more of the practical day-to-day things, can you tell me a little bit about what kind of tools do you use as a team, or you specifically? Which tools do you prefer as a company?
So we're all in Python on the back end with some Rust out of our team in Austria. We've got front end is all JavaScript, and my team is working primarily in Python and SQL. We have room to do other things because we run our models in Pachyderm, and Pachyderm's a local company. I started working with them a couple years ago. They have a service that runs in Kubernetes that lets you organize containerized models and track and version all of your code and all of your data, which I found tremendously powerful because it means you can have anything you want in those containers and auto scale them really easily. Um, and we're in Google Cloud. Um, so yeah, so I guess we have a little bit of stuff in Java actually, now that I think about it, but we're trying to minimize that as much as possible.
So you have Java as part of the data science team.
Yeah, because we're using Apache Beam, the Google hosted version, which is called Dataflow. And we found that the Java API just works a lot better than the Python one.
And like this other tools that you mentioned, like Kubernetes, I was wondering if, now that especially you're a hiring person, do you look background, or yeah, but so like background in Kubernetes, for example, for in a person that you're going to hire, or is that less of a priority?
The people on my team don't have to have used Kubernetes before. We have an ops team, um, and I'm actually helping them recruit also, um, because I think it's more important that the ops team knows more about Kubernetes. But I learned it on the job, and we don't have to be Kubernetes experts in our roles.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's not that complicated for the types of things that we do. We're not doing a lot of intricate networking or anything like that. And Pachyderm handles most of the stuff that we need to worry about. Um, at least so far, anyway. I really haven't had too many problems with Kubernetes. It's been actually, I've been pretty impressed with it as far as tooling goes. The hardest thing for me was when I was in AWS in my previous role, um, just learning all of the security configurations and everything for setting up multiple clusters on multiple accounts, and all of that was challenging for me. But again, it gave me so much more respect for what the ops team does.
Yeah. Yeah, but I feel like that's also kind of like there should be a good division between what a data scientist does and an ops team does because yeah, I mean there could be stuff that you need to learn in regards to development maybe or deploying your model at the end.
Hmm.
But yeah, many times I found that, those are things that you can learn on the job as you said
Yeah.
and not really things that you should be like focusing on as a aspiring data scientist.
I mean, I think there's a lot of room for data engineers who are strong on ops. I don't think I would have gotten this job if I didn't have that background, just because Sentry is, a developer tool, and we have to understand a lot about what goes on in the CI/CD workflow and all of that in order to help people with debugging. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think it really depends on what interests you. And I think there's a lot of room for people to move back and forth. And especially now with big data, there's a lot of room for people who want to be sort of the big data ops person. And I think that there's plenty of work for people who are interested in both of those things.
Yeah, exactly. So you already mentioned this a little bit before, but just want to clarify a little bit. So what do you guys as a team deliver at the end of a project typically?
Well, it varies, right? So our deliverables might be anything from a model um, that's actually running in real time and sending out results, um, whether that's labeled data or just a dashboard. We have other things that are just dashboards, and we have data pipelines that we build. We're using Airflow also, I neglected to mention. And we're helping other teams learn how to use Airflow so that we can empower more of the company to share more of their data across teams.
I see. Okay. These all sound really great. And that's also more or less what I heard from other people too. The deliverables really depend on the project, but I also found that there is a lot of confusion when it comes to deliverables of a data science project uh, on
Yeah.
people who don't really know the profession so well. But yeah, so it's more proof that, depends on the project.
Yeah, it depends. And, we definitely have quite a lot of little projects that are just help us answer this question,
Hmm.
or, help us understand if this is even the right question to be asking,
Yeah,
or help us
exactly.
figure out what questions we should be asking, right? And those are just, kind of analysis where we're telling a data story at the end. And maybe we were working in notebooks or something for that, and we write up a report.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and sometimes that's good enough, and that's what your business needs. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, let's talk about how you feel about your job a little bit. So, can you tell me the most exciting or the most fun thing about your job?
Honestly, I really love so much of it. I'm so excited about my team. They're so much fun to work with, and they ask really great questions, and they help each other, and they're just learning a ton right now. So I love that. I really love that I get to work with other senior engineers, and I'm learning a ton from them. We're, like I said, we're hiring people right now. So that's fun because we get to talk to people from all different kinds of backgrounds and learn from them when they come in and tell us about why they're interested in Sentry. Um, I love working with the rest of leadership and talking about the future of the company and thinking about the architecture that we're building. And like I said, I love looking at data. I'm perfectly happy to just sit and code for hours at a time and look at data and build models. So I really like it right now because it's a great combination of things that make me want to get out of bed in the morning.
Oh, that's really great. But one question about the things that you just said: Do you think now that you're a senior data science, you have more say in the business decisions, or do you think it just stayed the same? It was the same before when you were a, let's say, a normal data scientist.
I think that's a great question. I find that that really depends on the company, and how data driven they are. And
Hmm.
it's really interesting because I've worked at places where the product team literally said, I don't believe in data. I only make gut decisions.
That's great.
Right. And I've worked at places where the product team would come to us and say, help, your team is the only team that can help us. We have a huge problem right
Hmm.
now and we can't understand what's going on. We need you to dig in and help us solve this problem.
Yeah.
And I've worked at places that were, in between. So,
Yeah, sure.
in that sense, I feel like it's always a relationship that, like all relationships, requires work on both sides, right? You need product and leadership to invest in data and trust data and invest in the team and growing the team. And you also need data scientists who are interested in understanding the product and collaborating with engineering. You can't just like hole up somewhere and make notebooks and and not talk to people. You have to collaborate.
Yeah,
So
that makes a lot of sense. So then, what about the most boring part of your job, or that the thing that you don't like or like the least? Let's say.
I will say I do not love making dashboards. Um,
Who does?
it's funny. When I was younger, I really loved doing data visualization. I always found it really satisfying. And I still love the results, but I don't love the process of doing it.
Hmm.
I just don't. And I don't love SQL. I'll be totally honest. I really don't like it.
I haven't come across a lot of people who does. So.
Well, it's interesting because I've got, the two people on my team right now are really good at SQL. And so I really love that I can go to them and say, hey, I'm trying to do this really hairy query. Can you help me? Um,
It's nice to have people like that close by.
right? Yeah. I mean, I feel like I can help them with Python and they can help me with SQL, and it's great.
Mm. Nice. Okay, so a little bit about the culture of the companies that you worked at. So
Mhm.
not one specific company, but I want to ask you about being a woman in data science. Have you encountered any bias at all at any time?
I've always experienced at least a little bias. I think it's worse when you're the only woman in the engineering team. And I've been that person. Um, None of it is as bad as the sexism I experienced in academia.
Really? Wow.
My research field was much worse than software. I think people think biology is all women, and my discipline was not by a long shot. Um, so I think it's been, for me, really refreshing that for the most part, I think people in software are more aware. They're trying, there's more open conversations about these kinds of problems. And I've been lucky that I've been in at least three roles where I was able to help recruit more women and help shift the ratios and help educate other people at the company about how to improve their hiring practices and how to improve onboarding and how to make people feel included once they joined.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's great that you're keeping an eye out for that.
It's really important to me. And like I said, I didn't have enough of it when I was in research, and I really want to try and make it better for everyone else than it was for me.
Oh, that's really nice. So, as a last question before we say goodbye, do you have any advice for aspiring data scientists?
This is a great question. I feel like, I really want to encourage people to figure out exactly what they want to be doing and don't just jump onto data science because it sounds like a sexy job, right? It's a lot of it is not that sexy. It's just, it's still a job. And if you want to work with data all the time, then there's several areas you can go into that let you be around data and work with data. So I think, it helps to figure out, are you more interested in user behavior or are you more interested in data closer to the engineering side? I figured out I didn't really want to study what are people clicking on, or any of that kind of stuff as much as, okay, what does the data actually tell us about how the app works? So I think figuring out those kinds of questions helps a lot. And figuring out, do you want to write code all day, or do you want to be at a company where your main tools are notebooks and your main deliverables are reports? I think those are different kinds of jobs. I like coding personally. I feel like it gives me more room for creativity and building things, and there's just this vast possibility around I can build things that don't exist yet. Um, but I know a lot of people who, really just want to look at data and do some math, and that's the part that's interesting to them. So that's a different kind of job. So I think it's really important to find out, when you're talking to companies about potential roles, exactly the kinds of questions you're asking, right? What do you do all day? What are the deliverables? Those are great questions to be asking.
Yeah. Yeah, that's also one of the main advice I give people when they ask me about how they can become data scientists. And I just tell them you have to first decide if you actually want to be a data scientist, because it's a really vague term, especially right now.
Exactly. Exactly.
You can find a lot of different names for the same position, or you can also find the same name for a lot of different positions. So you really have to make sure that you know what you're getting yourself into. So, yeah. So that was all from me, Samantha, for today. Thanks a lot for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. This was really fun.
I'm glad to hear that.